I thought fetting $300 a month was enough to finally breathe. For the first few months in Medellín, it actually was. The rent was cheap, the food was real, and the pace of life felt like something I'd forgotten existed. But 20 months later, I was sitting in a studio apartment smaller than my old bathroom back in Ohio, with less than $4,000 left in my savings account, and no clear way home. This is what happened to me, and if you're thinking about doing what I did, you need to hear it first. My name is Gary. I'm 63 years old. I spent 37 years working logistics for a mid-size manufacturing company in Columbus. Not glamorous work, not the kind of thing you brag about at dinner parties. But it was steady, and for most of my adult life, steady was enough. I managed warehouse schedules, coordinated shipments, dealt with the kind of daily friction that builds up, so slowly you don't notice. It's grinding you down until one morning you wake up, and your first thought isn't about the day ahead. It's about how many years you have left before you don't have to do this anymore. That thought started showing up around my late 50s. And by the time I hit 61, it wasn't a background thought anymore. It was the only thought that mattered. I took early retirement. The company offered a package, and I took it before I had time to second-guess myself. My Social Security wouldn't kick in at full benefit for a few more years, so I applied early at 62. It came out to about $1,300 a month. My mortgage back in Columbus was already paid off, which was the one thing I had going for me. But property taxes, utilities, car insurance, groceries, the occasional medical bill I hadn't planned for, it added up fast. After everything, I had maybe $200 left at the end of each month. And my savings, the thing I had spent 4 decades carefully building, sat at around $41,000. $41,000 after 37 years of working. That number still does something to me when I say it out loud. I knew I couldn't sustain that life. Not long term. Not without watching that number drop every single month until it was gone. And the thought that kept coming back, the one I couldn't shake at 2 in the morning when I couldn't sleep, was this. Is this really what I worked for? I started watching YouTube late one night in January. I wasn't even looking for anything specific. I was just looking away from the ceiling. And somewhere in the algorithm, a video found me. An American guy in Colombia, 60-something, walking through a market, talking about his rent. $310 a month, utilities included. Fresh produce, he said, for almost nothing. A real community, a slower rhythm. He said if you have more than $1,000 a month coming in, you can live comfortably, not survive. Live. I watched that video 3 times. Over the next 2 months, I watched dozens more. Expats in Medellín, in Cartagena, in smaller cities I'd never heard of. Different people, different budgets, different situations, but the same core message. If you're willing to simplify, your money goes further here than anywhere in the States. And the more I watched, the more the math started to rearrange itself in my head. My fifth time $300 wasn't a trap in Colombia. It was a salary. I joined Facebook groups. I read forums. I asked questions and got back answers from real people who had made the jump. The consensus was always the same. Budget $300 to $400 for rent. $100 for food if you shop local. Transportation almost nothing. Budget $600 and you'll be comfortable. Budget $8 and you'll feel rich. I did my own math. If I kept my monthly spending under $900, my savings became a genuine emergency fund instead of a countdown clock. And for the first time in years, I started thinking about the future as something I might actually enjoy rather than just endure. I wasn't naive. I knew it wasn't perfect. I read the warnings too. About culture shock, about the language barrier, about the adjustment period. I read them and I filed them under things I'll deal with when I get there. What I didn't read, what none of those forums or videos or comment sections really talked about, was what it would feel like to build a life from the ground floor at 62 years old in a country where you don't know a single person. I sold my car. I put the house up for a long-term rental and found a property manager. I packed 2 suitcases, genuinely just 2, and in March I boarded a flight to Medellín. The first week was something I still don't have the right word for. Overwhelming, yes, but also exhilarating in a way I hadn't felt since I was young. The city was loud and colorful in a way that felt alive rather than chaotic. The neighborhood I landed in, Laurels, had tree-lined streets and little coffee shops, and people sitting outside in the evenings like they had nowhere more important to be. I found an apartment within 4 days. 1,100,000 pesos a month, which was just under $280. It wasn't much. One room, a small kitchen, a bathroom with a showerhead that ran lukewarm on a good day. But the light came in through the window in the morning, and the street below had a bakery that opened at 6. And the smell of fresh bread and coffee drifted up, and I thought, okay, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the thing I was missing. The first month I tracked everything, every coffee, every meal, every Uber, every grocery run. At the end of April, I added it up. I had spent $690, including rent. I sat with that number for a long time. In Columbus, $690 didn't cover my property taxes. Here, it covered my entire life with room to spare. I remember thinking, for the first time in maybe 15 years, that I felt ahead of something instead of behind it. And I want to be honest about what that feeling does to you, because I think it's important. When you've spent most of your adult life in a state of low-grade financial anxiety, never broke, never desperate, but never fully at ease either, and then suddenly the pressure lifts, there's a kind of euphoria that comes with it. And euphoria makes you stop asking the hard questions. It makes the problems you filed under things I'll deal with later feel very far away. The practical math was working. But something else wasn't, and it started quietly, the way the hard things always do. The days were long. I mean that in the literal sense, but also in another sense that's harder to explain. I had no structure. Back in Columbus, even when I hated the job, it gave the day a shape. Here I woke up when I woke up, ate when I was hungry, wandered when I felt like it, came home when I was tired. It sounded like freedom, and for the first few weeks it felt like it. But freedom without purpose has a way of turning into something else. I started spending a lot of time in Park Poblado, just sitting watching people go by. I walked the same routes because they were familiar. I ate at the same places because I knew what to point at on the menu. I studied Spanish with an app on my phone, but real conversations were slow and frustrating, and most of the time I smiled and nodded and hoped context would carry me through. The loneliness crept in around month 2. Not dramatic loneliness, not the kind that shows up all at once. The quiet kind. I'd go entire days without a real conversation. I mean a conversation where someone asks you something and actually waits for your answer. Where something you say makes someone laugh or think. Where you feel like a person with a history instead of just a foreigner ordering a coffee. I noticed it most at dinner. Back home, I'd eaten alone for years and it never bothered me much. Here, surrounded by tables of families and groups of friends who'd known each other since childhood, eating alone felt different, like I was watching a life I didn't have access to. That's when I met Camila. She worked at a small cafe near my apartment, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and handwritten menus on a chalkboard. I went in 3 or 4 times a week because the coffee was good and the Wi-Fi was reliable. She was in her early 40s, dark-haired, quick to laugh at things, the kind of person who made you feel like you'd been there before even when you hadn't. Her English was better than my Spanish, which meant we could actually talk. And for me, in that period, actually talking felt like water after a long, dry stretch. At first, it was just small things. She'd ask where I was from, what I missed about home, whether I liked the rain season. I'd ask about the neighborhood, about where to find good fruit, about the best route to avoid traffic. The conversations were short, but they were real. She remembered what I'd said the day before. She asked follow-up questions. She laughed at the right moments. I didn't think much about it at first. It was just nice to have somewhere to go where someone knew my face. But I started going more often. 5 times a week, then every day. and when she had a few minutes between customers, she'd come sit across from me and we'd talk. About her family. She had 2 daughters, the older one in school, the younger one only 7. About her mother, who lived with her and had a bad knee that made everything harder. About how long the days were, how hard it was to make ends meet on what the cafe paid. She wasn't complaining, exactly. She was just talking the way people talk when they trust you with the real version of their life. I listened. And I think that was the thing. I was a good listener. I had the time and the quiet and the genuine interest. And she seemed to feel that. The conversations got longer. The small talk gave way to real things. One afternoon she mentioned, almost in passing, that her younger daughter had a doctor's appointment coming up, but she wasn't sure how she was going to cover the cost. It wasn't a direct ask. She didn't look at me with expectation. She just said it the way you say something when you're carrying it and need to put it down somewhere for a moment. I told her not to worry about it. I said it before I'd even thought it through. The appointment cost about $60. For me, that was nothing, less than one dinner out back in Columbus. I gave her the money the next morning, and she looked at me with something that I hadn't seen directed at me in a long time. Not just gratitude, something more like relief. The way someone looks when they realize they're not completely alone. That feeling hit me somewhere deep. I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds from the outside. I know what you're probably thinking. But I want you to understand what was happening on my side, because I think that's the part most people miss when they hear stories like this. I wasn't being foolish. I wasn't blind. I was just, and I think this is the honest word, lonely. And when you've been lonely for long enough, and then someone makes you feel like you matter to them, the part of your brain that does the math shuts down. Because the math has never made you feel anything like this. So when it happened again, a month later, her mother needed a prescription refill, around $80. I helped. And the month after that, a small issue with the electricity bill, another $70. Each time, taken on its own, it felt like nothing. A generous thing to do for someone I cared about. Not a pattern. Not a problem. But it was both. My monthly spending drifted upward so gradually I almost didn't notice. $690 in April, $740 in May, then $800, then past $9. Each month I told myself it was temporary, that next month would settle back down, that this was just life having a rough patch. And each month it didn't settle. I stopped tracking as carefully. Not consciously. I didn't decide to stop. I just found myself not adding things up the way I had at the beginning. Because when you're watching your own numbers closely, you can't pretend you don't see what's happening. And I wanted, very badly, not to see. Around month 11, I started noticing things. Small things at first. The timing of when she mentioned a problem seemed to follow a rhythm I recognized but couldn't quite name. A difficult week tended to surface right around the time I'd mentioned having a good month. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself this was what happened when a man who spent decades in logistics tried to find patterns in human relationships. You see systems where there aren't any, but the noticing didn't go away. One evening, after a particularly hard stretch where I'd helped cover what she said was a school fee for her older daughter, I tried to bring it up, not accusingly. I didn't have the evidence for that, and honestly, I didn't want to be right. I just said I'd been thinking about our situation, about what I could realistically continue doing, about the limits of my income. The response came fast and it came hard. She was hurt. How could I say that? Did I really think she was using me? She had opened up to me, trusted me, and this was how I treated that. She left the cafe early that day and didn't text me that evening the way she usually did. I felt terrible. Not because she'd convinced me I was wrong. I still wasn't sure what the truth was, but because the possibility of being wrong felt unbearable. Because if I was wrong, I had just accused someone I cared about of something ugly, and if I was right, then everything I thought I had in Medellín was something else entirely. I didn't bring it up again. And I kept helping. Smaller amounts, told myself it was just being a decent person. but I stopped asking questions. I stopped looking at the numbers too closely. Because it was easier, genuinely easier, to believe everything was fine. By month 17, my savings had dropped from 41,000 to just over 6,000. That number appeared on my phone screen one morning while I was sitting in the cafe, and I had to look at it twice before it registered. I did the math forward. $6,000 with a monthly shortfall of around $300 to $400 beyond what my Social Security covered gave me maybe a year and a half before I had nothing, no margin, no room for anything unexpected. And at 63, with no income beyond Social Security, unexpected things weren't a question of if. I told her. Not everything at once. I didn't have the vocabulary in any language for the full truth of what I was feeling. But I told her I was in a difficult situation with money and that I needed to pull back significantly. That I probably couldn't help the way I had been. She heard me out. She nodded. She said she understood. And then, over the next 3 weeks, the cafe visits got shorter. The texting became infrequent. The warmth that I'd grown to depend on, that I'd organized whole days around, quietly withdrew. A month later, we still exchanged the occasional polite word when I came in. But the conversations were gone. The follow-up questions were gone. The laughing at my bad Spanish was gone. I sat in that cafe for a few more weeks out of something I can only call stubbornness, or maybe denial. Then I stopped going. I want to be fair here because I think fairness matters. I don't know Camila's full truth. I don't know if what happened between us was calculated from the beginning, or something that started genuine and evolved into something more complicated. I think in some ways it doesn't matter now. What matters is what I didn't see clearly because I didn't want to. I'm still in Medellín. I moved to a smaller apartment in a neighborhood further from the center. My rent is now $180. I'm back to tracking every peso. I'm back to the version of this life that made the math work. The one without the cafe, without the conversations, without the feeling that someone was keeping a seat warm for me somewhere. The math works again. And it feels about as good as math usually does. Here's the thing nobody in those YouTube videos ever said, and I sat through maybe 300 of them before I got on that plane. They talked about rent and groceries, and transportation and exchange rates. They talked about the cost of healthcare and the price of a beer and how far your dollar goes at a local market. And all of that is real. All of that is accurate. What they didn't talk about was the cost of being a person, not the financial cost. The other one, the need to be somewhere that feels like it was waiting for you. The need to matter to someone by name. The need to be known. Because here's what I've figured out. Living alone in a one-room apartment, in a city where I still sometimes struggle to order my lunch correctly. There are two kinds of expenses when you move abroad at 63. The ones you can plan for, and the ones that will find you when you've let your guard down because you've been lonely for too long. And the second kind doesn't appear on any budget spreadsheet I've ever seen. I don't regret coming here. I want to say that clearly. The life I had in Columbus at the end wasn't a life. It was an endurance exercise. And even with everything that happened, I've learned things about myself that I don't think I could have learned any other way. That I'm more resilient than I gave myself credit for. That loneliness is not a personality flaw. It's just a human condition that gets harder to manage the older you get and the fewer people you have around who remember who you were. But I also lost something real. Not just the money. Though the money matters, I won't pretend it doesn't. I lost time. Time I had planned differently. And at 63, time feels different than it did at 40. You're more aware of what you're trading when you spend it. If you're thinking about retiring abroad, and I understand why you are, I really do, because the numbers on paper make a compelling argument, here is the one thing I would add to every spreadsheet, every YouTube comment, every Facebook group response. Budget for the human part. Not just for medical emergencies or travel, or the occasional imported item you can't live without. Budget for what it costs to feel connected. Because you will try to find that connection. You will need it. And if you find it in the wrong place, at the wrong time, when you're most vulnerable, it will cost you more than rent ever could. Surviving is one budget, living is another. I confused them for longer than I care to admit. And the distance between those two numbers was almost everything I had left.